Hey everyone, this is Abu from the future talking to you in the present. Just a quick note before we get into today's final episode about ancillary justice. As we stated in the first two episodes, the audio is a little bit rough. We recorded these episodes many months ago. In fact, these were the very first episodes Opsa and I ever recorded for this show, and you'll notice the audio is not quite up to par. We truly apologize about that. We still loved this book and thought our discussions were super fun, and we hope you have a blast listening to them. But please bear with us on the audio. Going forward, of course, our audio will be much better because we've upgraded our mics. Hope you enjoy this one, though. You should be afraid of the person with the microphone. You should be afraid. All around, the cry goes out, put on headphones made of carbon fiber. The person with microphones. You should be afraid of the person with podcasts. You should be afraid.
Mic drop right there. That was so smooth. Holy shit.
It's that first take confidence, when you're not thinking about it and you just do it. Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a bit about ourselves along the way.
I'm Opsa.
And I'm Abu. And Opsa, we are here today on this very episode to complete our reading of Ancillary Justice. Are you excited?
3 parts. I'm so excited. This has been a long time coming, and we finally arrived.
We did it.
We're at the end of this fantastic book.
We are indeed. But before we get into it, a bit of housekeeping we need to take care of at the top of the episode. To start off, a spoiler warning as always. Today's discussion will contain spoilers for the entirety of Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. So if you haven't read the book, maybe go do that first and then go back and listen, because we've read the entire thing.
I would also say you should probably listen to the first 2 episodes in which we covered the first 16 chapters.
I agree.
As always, we encourage you to read along with us and share your thoughts. So email us at sci-fi bookclubpod@loreparty.com and join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi bookclubpod.
All of that makes so much sense. Here's something else that makes sense. We post free reading guides and discussion questions over on the Patreon, as well as bonus clips and bloopers. We do make mistakes. It may not sound like it, but we do every once in a while. The Patreon is also where you can join our Discord to keep the nerdy sci-fi discussions going with the fellow readers in our community, and also with us. You and I are in the Discord as well.
Of course. You can also check out the season's entire reading schedule and read along with us. All of those links are in the show notes. We've covered the book. So You'll have the entire reading guide and all the discussions ahead of you.
That's right. Okay, so housekeeping out of the way, here is the game plan for today's episode. First, we will begin by summarizing these final set of chapters that we read in Ancillary Justice. We'll also be sharing our impressions along the way. Then we will dive into a couple of big takeaways in our sci-fi analysis. And finally, we will round out the episode by sharing our final impressions, our final thoughts, and giving the book a little rating.
Makes sense to me.
All right. Well, before we get into all of that, let's take a quick breather, but don't go anywhere, dear listener, because when we come back, we are finishing this book.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Welcome back, listeners. we'll be starting with our reading discussion, and of course, with a summary of these 8 chapters. So, starting with chapter 17. In this chapter, we get a very brief explanation of how Breck survived and spent the 20 years since the destruction of Justice of Torin.
Right.
We're told an even briefer and more vague explanation for Breck's wealth. I had joined a religious order and made a great deal of money. In all that time, I only killed a dozen people.
Incredible. Imagine somebody like Bill Gates being like, oh yeah, I did some stuff with microchips, and that's why I'm filthy rich.
Just a couple microchips.
Right. Missing some details along the way. In the next couple of chapters, we follow Breck and Syvarden as they journey toward a Radch station over the next 7 to 8-ish months. We aren't given an exact timeline, but they do spend a healthy chunk of time together. Throughout this journey, we are given a lot of insight into the Radch bureaucracy, all this paperwork, talking to this guy, talking to this guy. We also get a lot of world building about this universe and where the Radch Empire sort of fits into it for people in it and not within it. I'd argue, though, perhaps most importantly, over the course of these chapters where Breck and Syvarden are just traveling, we start to see the formation of what could be called a friendship between the two. It's very subtle, it's very in between the lines, but we start to see it take shape, and it certainly pays off once they reach Omagh Palace.
You also see this motif of loyalty emerging even in these early chapters. And of course, also the tests to that loyalty that at times Breck and at times circumstances foist upon them.
Yeah.
We recall prior to leaving Therod that Breck throws down a sack of money and invites Syvarden to leave and to have it. And it would be enough for her to live at least a satisfactory existence for a few months or get super high for a few weeks. And Syvarden doesn't crumble to the pressure. And she kind of remains loyal to Breck and says at one point, I'll follow you wherever you go, essentially.
Right.
And I agree. You definitely see this budding friendship starting to blossom.
Definitely. Such a great point about loyalty.
And once they do arrive at Omagh Palace, things start to get dangerous as Breck has to somehow navigate the reappearance of Skayat Alwar.
Holy shit.
And the presence of the all-seeing station AI as she attempts to fulfill her mission.
Right.
Truly an incredible scene at the end of that chapter when, after years of pursuing her revenge and having escaped Shishrna and all remnants of her past, Skayat Alwar appears.
Right. Can you imagine? A ghost, a true ghost from her past, just making an appearance. I was on the train to work listening to that chapter, not knowing that was about to happen. And honestly, it was like a jaw drop moment when Skayat appeared.
Absolutely.
Looking back on it, and especially when I reread the chapters, I realized there were some incredibly not so subtle hints that Skayat was about to come back. But reading it for the first time, a jaw-dropping moment.
Absolutely.
And I will say, I loved these chapters on Omagh Palace once we got to it, because there were some really great sort of spy thriller moments. Like Breck has to keep up appearances and be this rich tourist. She has to go buy some bougie and expensive clothing from REI or whatever is on Omagh Palace. What's interesting is her emotions really do break through the surface sometimes.
Right.
They slip through her disguise, especially around Skayat, right? She kind of almost cracks around him, especially when she sees that pin that clearly has Lieutenant On's name on it, right? On his sleeve. And I found it particularly cute that Syvarden, of all people, is the one who's able to read Breck the best in these emotional moments.
Right.
Syvarden can see how Breck is feeling, and despite Breck's internal thoughts and monologue kind of being like, oh, I'm hiding this super well. I'm an AI. I can keep my face totally blank. Syvarden has to come up and be like, are you okay? Is everything okay? Because your face is not totally blank right now.
Right.
And I think that kind of shows two things. One, it shows that Breck is perhaps more human than we suspect, that the AI part of her isn't so, I am just a robot.
Yeah.
And secondarily, I think it also shows that this past like yearish that they've been traveling together and becoming companions of sorts, and their loyalty, as you were saying, growing to each other. I think it just shows how close they've gotten. That Syvarden can pick up on the little tells that Breck might have, that other people might miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is, of course, a recurring theme, this like notion of the ancillary, these AI and emotions. And very early on in, I think, our first episode, we came to understand that emotions are integral for the functioning of the ancillary.
Yes.
They couldn't be entirely excised from them for them to properly function. And so, of course, at times, the mask kind of slips a little bit. The ancillary is, I mean, is human, and there is humanity there, and it's absolutely interesting to see how Syvarden is the one to reveal that to us at these times.
It's cool. It's really cute.
And of course, on the station, we also get a much closer look at Radch culture, Radch religion, and the intricacies of class and power as it plays out on the station. So everything from the pins and accessories that people are wearing to the quality of their clothing and the types of offerings that they can give. REI being, of course, the highest tier of outfit. It all says something. It does, about where a person stands within Radch society.
Totally.
We also get to see how truly bare bones the welfare system is in Syvarden's pretty shitty experience, wherein she eventually does end up fighting with somebody who is occupying the space that had been offered to her. And we come to understand that their daily provisions are this skell, this gruel that they have to eat for every meal. They get these threadbare, worn through articles of clothing. And it's just not quite the vaunted promise that the Radch civilization has made us believe that all citizens are entitled to.
Totally. This really makes me think of Breck and Strigan talking about Syvarden's addiction. And Breck being like, well, I don't know, why the fuck doesn't he just go back to Radch society? They'll take care of him. They take care of this sort of thing. If you're addicted, the Radch will fix you, quote unquote. Now, having sort of seen this welfare state front and center, I am convinced they do not do any sort of actually helping people with addiction, We see this in reality, right? Like we see the vaunted promises of so-and-so program only to see the reality fall well short of it. I am certain that the Radch is also very much making lofty promises about how great the Empire is and how much it can do so much for all of its citizens. And the reality, of course, is Syvarden ending up in a fight and ending up having to go back to Breck and be hired by her again.
Yeah, it's also notable that though Breck had made an offer of clothing and food and other things to Syvarden, that Syvarden was so certain of the quality of the welfare state that she rejected it all. She wanted nothing, in fact.
And you know why that is? Because Syvarden has never dealt with the welfare state before. Syvarden's from a rich fucking house. He's a Nepo baby.
Absolutely.
And so he's like, oh, I don't know. Of course, the welfare state takes care of everyone. I don't know. I've never used it, but it must be great. And then now he experiences it for the first time. And it turns out it's shitty. Anyway, let's continue with our summary, because as we near the end of the book, shit really starts to hit the fan. Breck and Syvarden have a very awkward tea date with my guy, Captain Vel Ulsk.
That's right.
He's big on making the Radch great again, which is something that Breck obviously disagrees with. And even Syvarden is sort of uncomfortable with some of those ideas. They then later go to a dinner party at Skiat's place, and literally Anander Mianai's Secret Service just shows up, crashes the dinner party, and they apprehend Breck and Syvarden. And Breck and Syvarden finally come face to face with not just one, but two Anander Mianais. And this is the moment, right? This is what Breck has been working 20 years for. And she is able to drop her bombshell revelation. Hey, Anander, you got a split personality, buddy. And all hell breaks loose. Chaos breaks out across the station. The Lord of the Radch is trying to contain this revelation, right? powering systems down and closing off and ordering certain parties to attack each other. The goal is to contain this within Omag Palace and not let it spread to the rest of the Empire, and not to let the other Anander Minai copies learn this information. Luckily for us, Brek and Sivardin and Skiat, through like a very intense third act sort of climax of the book, they're able to save the station from ultimate destruction and successfully stop Anander from blocking the signal. So it's out there, cat's out of the bag. Every Anander in the whole Empire now knows this like long-held secret that they are actually split amongst themselves.
Secret that had been held for 1,000 years, shockingly.
Right.
And
Damn.
in the matter of 19 years, I mean, you got to give credit to Brek. Managed to do something that the Ananders had been doing everything they could possibly do to prevent.
Yes.
Going so far as to deceive themselves, and also building arms against one another should war break out. And out of loyalty, out of love and some kind of compassion for her murdered lieutenant on, Brek upends this whole civilizational disorder.
It's incredible. A civil war for the person that you loved. Are you doing that for your lovers, Opsa? Civil war?
Well, there's just the one, is the thing. So, unless there are copies I'm unaware of.
I do have some news for you. I've been waiting 20 years to drop this.
Oh, no. Is this our moment? Are you going to immobilize me with a song from 10,000 years ago?
Oh, just you wait, buddy. Well, to wrap up our summary of the reading and of this book, what happens at the end is Woke Anander recruits Brek sort of somewhat against her will. Like, Brek is not like jumping at the gun to become a captain and to have her own ship. But Woke Anander is just kind of like, this is happening. Sorry, your name's already on the dotted line. And Sivardin will act as Brek's first lieutenant. And of course, this is unprecedented because Brek is an ancillary with now her own ship, right?
Yeah.
No ancillary in history has ever captained her own ship. Brek will be the first to do so. And seemingly, she's just going to walk around passing as human. Only a select few will ever know her true nature. In all intents and purposes, within Radch society, will be given citizenship and be raised to the rank of captain. And that's where the book wraps up.
And we can't forget that in bestowing Brek with the captainhood of Mercy of Kalar, that Anander also gives Brek her surname. So Brek has gone from Brek Gaiad, I believe, was at least her cover on Omag Palace, to Brek Mianai. So it's quite a stunning turn of events for this ancillary that was effectively killed off some 20 odd years ago, barely survived in just this one outstanding body, and has now risen to the rank of Mianai's child. What has happened? Has both been murdered?
What a come up.
What a come up. Yeah.
It's amazing. Started a civil war, got my own ship, got a promotion, and got a new daddy all in one day.
Also, let's not forget, kills daddy. Six times over prior to being adopted.
Right. Amazing.
Just so startling.
Yeah, what a journey for Brek. And that's the summary of these final batch of chapters in the book. We've already sort of been gushing about it, but Opsa, I am curious to know, what do you think? What are your impressions of not just these final chapters, but the book at large at this point, now that we're done?
I mean, I think we were in the same boat. You and I both struggled to put this book down. I mean, especially this section. I think I finished it in 2 sittings.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that I had meal breaks in between. I couldn't stop flipping the pages. On the whole, I'm pretty satisfied with this book. I'm pretty satisfied with this ending. We're not left with a cliffhanger around the main thread of this book. We see Justice Torrent get her revenge for Lieutenant On's murder. Again, several times over, killing not one, but at least 6 Ananders directly and countless others in the pandemonium on Omog Palace. Absolutely. I'm happy that that thread was closed.
Right.
There are others, of course. There are some open questions that I'm sure we'll discuss more over the course of this episode that I wouldn't have been unhappy to have gotten a little more kind of color and insight into.
Oh, yeah.
But we, of course, know there are more books in the series, so I can't fault Leckie for keeping some of those things for the sequels. I did find the structure of this particular section a little formulaic, and in general, the book had some pretty, let's say, geometric structures. In this section, it's 8 chapters. The book is split into 24 chapters, and we find that the first 4 chapters of this section, they lay the groundwork. They set the stage.
Right.
They reintroduce Lieutenant Skyot and a now-grown Dasit from Shis'Urna, who was that little girl that was leaving flowers as Anandr performed her priesthood on Shis'Urna for that very brief stint.
Right.
And we, of course, get a little more color on how modern soldiers and the Radch understand the changing times, particularly in Captain Felsk. And there's, of course, also Breck's ongoing attempt to remain hidden in super plain sight from both the station AI and Anandr. I think we come to understand later on in those final chapters that the Lord Radch basically knew from like day 2 that Breck was in fact Justice of Torrens.
Or knew enough to be like, let's put a flag on this, let's just keep an extra eye on this person.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of questions still in Anandr's mind around what Seivarden was doing, their understanding or knowledge or ignorance of Justice of Torrens' role. A lot of really kind of great storytelling there. I enjoyed the continued exploration and contrast of a lot of the same motifs that we've encountered throughout this book, like the individual versus the collective, the motif of social conditioning and the other, loyalty, love, and humanity, especially as they relate to the Ancillary, these AI. There are a couple things I was less pleased by, and I'll just kind of run through this one in particular kind of quickly. Which is namely that none of my predictions came to pass.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up.
Which hurt. I read a handful in the last episode, and I think of those, the only one that formed anything along what I would call a passing grade was that Breck did in fact join forces in a way with some of the other disaffected citizens, namely Lieutenant Skyot and the other dock inspectors.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
We could see that coming. And everything else, it was a complete miss on. So we didn't see the emissary to the Presger come back as an ally or villain. Strigan, nowhere to be seen in these chapters. Wokenander, though not totally above reproach, I think in the end is deserving of the name.
Right, like seemingly the good Anandr.
Seemingly the good Anandr.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. What were your takeaways? What were your impressions?
Well, I agree basically with everything you said. I also very much enjoyed this conclusion to the book. I also couldn't put it down, especially at that confrontation with Anandr, right? Like once we're face to face with Anandr Mine, I'm seeing it through to the end of the book. I could not put it down.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things I loved about it, similar to you. I liked a lot of the big motifs that continue to carry through, some of the big themes and ideas that are consistent throughout this book. There are a couple of things I didn't like. I do want to start with the things I liked, though. I loved Seivarden and Breck's relationship and watching it evolve over time. I liked how subtle it was, right? There was no in-your-face, like, I am your friend, and like, there was no like sort of anime moment of in your face. And there's a time and place for that. I think being subtle here was more impactful. I loved, like I said, the big ideas about class, race, gender, politics. All of that has been a through line in this book, and we got to see more of that and digest more of that on Omog Palace. I really liked the final showdown with Anandr because it didn't just come down to some sort of like Deus Ex Machina. It didn't come down to some sort of like, I'm going to shoot you with this special gun. Pow, pow. We kind of knew the whole book what this showdown was going to be, and to see it unfold was so satisfying and dramatic.
Absolutely.
Just like you said, I like that we closed the loop on the thread of this book in particular, right? Breck is on a revenge mission. She does the revenge thing. shit goes down. And I know, of course, there's huge looming questions about now is there a civil war? What happens to the Radch? Brick and Savardin, what are they going to do now in charge of their own very own ship? Lots of huge questions left unanswered, but I'm actually quite satisfied with an open-ended conclusion like this.
Yeah.
Because Leckie did such a good job of closing the loop on the main thread, which was the revenge mission. Now, a couple of things that I was disappointed with, just to breeze through my list here. Same as you, I'm wondering where the fucking Preskar are. Where? You know, we talked about them this whole book and everyone keeps bringing them up and they literally played no role in this finale. I was super disappointed in that. Similarly, the gun seemingly was not really that important anyway, because Breck is such a great shot anyway. I feel like she could have just made any gun work super well and didn't need this like special gun.
Pretty disappointing.
Kind of disappointing to see the Preskar and this alien technology not really play that big a role. I also found myself a little bit bored in a couple of these chapters, especially when we're just sort of traveling, just like really just on the bus for a long time. And I know that time is where Leckie built out the world. And as much as I love some great world building and immersion, I do think it became a bit too dense in these final chapters. And I think it started to hurt the pacing. I was really starting to space out and getting bored with like the descriptions of all the fucking pins that everyone's wearing on their clothing, all the like proper and just ways that people in Radch society must interact.
Right.
The fucking like descriptions of the 900 types of teas and how they all aren't the right tea that Savardin likes to drink, you know? Like I was like, okay, I mean, I get it. Yeah. I will say I was a little disappointed that we favored world building over just a bit of a faster pace to the conclusion here.
Yeah.
Finally, kind of speaking about faster pace and conclusion, my final point ties in because I really, really enjoyed the spy thriller moments where Breck had to remain undercover, where Breck risked getting emotional and blowing her cover, right? All of that was so cool, but it happened in between these long stretches of Breck sitting in her hotel room watching soap operas, you know?
Literally watching soap operas, that's right. Yeah.
So my big critique there is that I would have wanted more for Breck to do in the vein of like spy thriller, stay undercover, blah, 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 blah. You know, it kind of felt like this confrontation with Anander happened to Breck rather than her actively seeking it out and putting the puzzle pieces in place to make it happen.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
She just kind of waited around in her hotel room and then the Secret Service showed up and boom, you know, we're there. So I was kind of like, oh gosh, this is like kind of convenient. You just wait around to get arrested is the plan. Kind of a lame plan.
Right.
So those were some critiques I did have for the end of the book, but did they like detract from my overall enjoyment? No. I loved this book start to finish. But we do have a couple of big ideas that we want to go a little deeper into. As we've stated, there are big themes and motifs all throughout this book, and we see more of them here in these final chapters. Before we do that, I think let's take another break, Opsa. Let's take a breather. Let's collect ourselves. Let's prepare, right? Let's watch a couple of soap operas. But, dear listener, don't go anywhere because we'll be back with our deep dive sci-fi analysis in just a minute.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that little break. I know that we did. With that, Abu, tell us a little bit about your takeaways from this book and this section.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this, Opsa, because I couldn't stop thinking about some of what we learned in these chapters. A lot of this is in line with the big themes about corruption and class and power and wealth and how all of those things intertwine in a society like the Radch Empire. And so for my takeaway, I wanted to take some time to dive deeper into some of the existential questions about the Radch Empire that are raised in these chapters. In particular, focusing on two people, Captain Vel on one side and Lieutenant Skiat on the other. Or I guess Doc Supervisor Skiat, whatever his damn promotion these days is.
Inspector Supervisors.
He'll always be lieutenant in my heart. Now, these two members of upper crust families, mind you, do sort of illustrate the political divide that's happening in the Radch Empire. And the divide, of course, as we know and as Breck knows, is caused quite directly by this very subtle Cold War between woke Anander on one side and the other Anander, which I'm just going to call Boomer Anander for simplicity's sake.
Pretty accurate.
So let's break down these ideas a little bit. To start, we have Captain Vel's viewpoint from the Tea Party, which in its most simplistic form basically boils down to make the Radch great again. It's this very conservative thinking that aligns with Boomer and Nander's views. This like desire to return to the imperialistic ways of the Radch of old, to start using ancillaries and annexations again, and to have those like hard-line policies against aliens like the Presker, right? All of the things that Wokenander has loosened over the last couple of centuries. Now, what I found really interesting was Breck's observation of Captain Vel's really hypocritical thinking in all of this, as Captain Vel is explaining their viewpoint. Quote, "People like Captain Vel love pointing out the atrocities that human troops have committed that ancillaries never would. As though making those ancillaries was not an atrocity in itself." End quote. Boom. Straight to the heart. That's a tough pill to swallow, because at first I was like, yeah, get that motherfucker. Like, Captain Vel is so wrong to think this. But if you take a moment and sit with that idea and this observation that Breck makes, this kind of selective morality that conveniently fits a political viewpoint is something we're all probably experienced with. We've all been on the receiving end of it, but also something we are all definitely guilty of as well.
Yeah, without a doubt.
We all do this to some extent, greater, lesser, to some extent. I think we all fall into this trap of, well, you know, that thing was bad, so let's do this other thing and let's brush under the rug. This other thing was also kind of bad too.
Yeah, cherry pick our way down this slippery slope.
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful way of putting it. Let's go to the other side of the coin now, right? On the other side, we have Skiat, who clearly aligns much more with woke Anander's politics.
Right.
Skiat, as we saw earlier in the book, supported Lieutenant On, and Skiat was bold enough to even raise uncomfortable political questions that other people are kind of hush-hush about. And in these chapters from today's reading, she even comments on how the Radch Empire is built on a core of imperialism. Quote, "And we're built to expand. We've been expanding for more than 2,000 years, and to stop will mean completely changing what we are." End quote.
Yeah.
And I loved that. First of all, this is a bold thing to say for someone who is part of this society. And Skiat can, of course, say it because she is someone of power and wealth and status. But it is a powerful observation about institutions and what their foundations say about them, right? Because if the whole system was built on a corrupt or an immoral base to begin with, changing that corruption and rooting it out, or changing that immorality, requires truly rethinking the whole system.
Absolutely.
And I can't help but just sort of think of the big questions we here in the States have grappled with about institutionalized racism and facing this idea that this country, in many ways and within many systems, was built on a foundation of slavery. To change that is not just a matter of change a policy here or there, but as Skiat is observing, you have to completely change what we are. It requires rethinking the whole system because the foundation from the beginning was corrupt or immoral. It's a powerful way of thinking, and it's telling that Skiat thinks this about the Radch Empire. To wrap up my takeaway, I do want to zoom way, way, way out, because there is some perspective that's worth noting here. Both Captain Vel and Skiat are part of powerful, rich families. They have the luxury, while still employed in their cozy jobs and getting great 401ks. The 401k match must be amazing.
100%.
While still cashing in on the checks, they have the luxury of having a political opinion. Lieutenant On was not someone with that luxury. Lieutenant On had to stay in line, had to work twice as hard as her fellow lieutenants, and even twice as hard as the fucking people she commanded.
Right.
To maintain her role, to maintain her paycheck, and to maintain the respect of her peers. And even then, she was killed for just being suspect. Anander did not come to her with incontrovertible proof that she was working against him. Lieutenant On was just suspect of being a little too woke Anander and not enough Boomer Anander, and so Boomer Anander decided to take action. She didn't have the luxury that Skiat and Vel have. And I know I'm sharing a lot of quotes, but I loved so many of the quotes in this book. I want to share one more here that I think illustrates this point. At the end of the book, Woke Anander tells Breck how any changes that ripple across the Empire will affect billions of people because this is a massive empire. But not everyone will feel those ripples equally. Quote, "If you've got power and money and connections, some differences won't change anything. It's the people without the money and the power who desperately want to live. For those people, small changes aren't small at all. What you call no difference is life and death to them." End quote.
Oof. Yeah, Wokenander. I mean, you gotta give him credit. You gotta give him credit. That's. Oof.
He's got some good ideas, Wokenander.
Oh, yeah.
I loved this. I read this and had to just like sit back and take a moment because it is so, so true and something I think privilege buffers you against. You get to wave off some things as not important because whatever, they're not going to affect you. If you have power, money, connections, you can weather the storm of political change or social upheaval to some extent. But if you're someone like Lieutenant On, or you're someone like the Ancillaries, who are not even citizens in this empire, or even if you are the people on the other end of the sword, right, the victims of annexations, every small, tiny policy change could upend your life and even end it, as we saw many times throughout the book. I just wanted to geek out about this like big idea that really kind of struck a chord with me. This idea of power and wealth and how changes ripple across an empire and who they affect and how they affect and who gets to have a voice and who doesn't. I think Anne Leckie does a wonderful job in this story of pointing those ideas out in both powerful and uncomfortable ways that I think can make all of us take pause and think about some of our own world perspectives and reconsider them. And that's fucking sci-fi, baby.
That's, yeah. I mean, that's, I commend that perspective. And Leckie did name the series the Imperial Radch, and she does make us confront that question of imperialistic societies. And
right.
We, of course, the products of one of them.
Certainly.
So I agree that is sci-fi, baby.
All right, I want to toss the mic to you. What's a big idea that you want to dive deeper into? What's your takeaway?
I think you brilliantly captured a core aspect of this novel, which is that question of class and society and how it all connects to this sprawling civilization that has lasted thousands of years.
Right.
And I think what I wanted to focus on is closely related, and it's really this concept of everyone outside of the Radch, everyone that's not a citizen, the uncivilized, the other, really, and how that plays out over the course of this section and the novel.
Right.
The most obvious other in this book is perhaps the Ancillary. They're not quite human. They were once human. They aren't citizens, despite being members of the civilization. They do work. You know, they put the whole team on their back, but they are not imbued with any of those values or rights afforded citizens.
Right.
And this is a thing that recurs throughout the section and throughout the book, of course. We see at times, for example, that Breck, despite appearing on Omag Palace as this wealthy foreigner with, in fact, citizen Syvarden in tow as her broke junkie servant that even in these circumstances, Syvarden is given more attention and honor than Breck, who is still considered even higher on the totem pole than the Ancillary.
Yeah.
Othering is a really core aspect of how the Radch define their own identity. It's pretty integral. You take within the civilization the Ancillary, and they're kind of kept at arm's length as far as an understanding of what makes any of the citizens human, despite things like emotion and loyalty and all of these other really human concepts we've seen Breck carry throughout the book and in her relationships and in her dealings and her motivations, that she is very clearly motivated by what we would consider to be
love,
like a core feature and quality of humanity. And we even see by the end of the novel, when Anandra gives Breck the surname Mianai, she still says something along the lines that no one thinks of you as an Ancillary anymore, which reinforces the fact that despite all of her accomplishments, despite otherwise not being recognized by anyone as an Ancillary, if she has gained any value, it must mean that categorically she must not in fact be an Ancillary.
Right. You're not that thing anymore because you have value now.
Right.
Value, not like value, and where the line is.
Exactly. And value can only be on this side of the other. The other obviously has no value.
Yeah.
We can consider the Presger, who are the recipients of all of the enmity and hatred of those members of the Radch who think that the decline is caused by these aliens.
Yeah. They're the boogeyman. The Presger are the boogeyman.
Yeah. And this othering of aliens is perhaps the most obvious role that aliens often play in science fiction. But it was particularly interesting to see that in the Radch civilization, it is quite stark. There are no non-human civilizations that are considered to be civilized.
Right. Even the civilization that Breck ends up with after Justice of Torn is blown up. Humans that have sort of shed their mortal bodies, right? They have all these limbs and implants, and they're barely human anymore. The Radch doesn't consider them, quote unquote, human society. They're outside of the Radch society. Again, that line of who has value and who doesn't.
It's interesting to note, even in the first couple chapters of this book, the head priest on Shisurnai in Ors reached a similar conclusion. And I'll quote from this section: I know at Seven Issa, or at least those like them, due to people they find on the wrong side of a dividing line. 5 years ago, it was non-citizen. In the future, who knows? Perhaps not citizen enough?
Oof.
It just captured this real horrifying thing that even prior to annexation, despite all else being equal, being equally human in body and form, in language and culture, that until they've come under the fold of the Radch civilization, that they can be treated as the other.
Right.
You can perpetrate massacres. Any number of really vile ways of engaging other living beings are up for grabs, apparently, when you are not a citizen.
Totally.
It's effectively what makes it so easy for Anandra to vilify the Presger, who ultimately we don't really know all that much about.
Right.
We don't know that they are quite the despicable, hated figure that Anandra has made them out to be.
Yeah.
And similarly with the Garced, who totally destroyed for possession of something that mildly even threatened Anandra.
Right.
The Valsky, who are referred to in this section as atheists for, in fact, being monotheists, like only worshipping the one god. And of course, like those pre-annex populations, like the Orcians.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable thing to see how Leckie really ties together class, society, concepts like humanity, and what makes an AI really artificial or not, and just the continuum, the spectrum there is really interesting to see, particularly as we see that those who are othered have just as much humanity, if not more, than the N group in this case.
Absolutely. I love this takeaway that you brought up. And as you were talking, I remembered that the one thing that we maybe do know a little bit about the Presger is that they have a very hardline value system where they decide this group matters, this group doesn't, and they just ignore the group that doesn't, and they either kill or subjugate the group that does matter.
Right.
And so far, humanity seemingly has survived because the Prescar are kind of like, you all matter so little to us. Like we could not give two shits. And you're like not even worth our time to subjugate. You know?
Yeah.
Who does that sound like? The Radch society. Who matters, who doesn't, absolutely. Who's citizen, who isn't, who's civilized, who's uncivilized.
Yeah.
And the very boogeyman that we're vilifying has a very similar black and white sort of morality system that the Radch Empire does.
They really are like the kind of figure in the mirror for the Radch.
Yeah.
They present as a really kind of great foil in that regard.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It reminds me of, I'm about to get all coastal elite for a second, but it reminds me of this New Yorker article I was reading this week.
Oh, New Yorker, you say?
This New Yorker article I was reading about how human history, real life human history, especially in the West, have sort of collectively agreed to vilify this like group of nomadic cultures like the Mongols. In every story, it's just like those evil, vicious, atheist Mongols, you know?
Bloodthirsty.
Right. The one thing you ask like anyone on the street what they know about Genghis Khan is like, oh, he birthed a lot of illegitimate children, you know? And like no one's talking about his very open like religious policies for all the nations that he conquered and allowed all of their temples and religions to stay in place, et cetera, et cetera. You know, like there's more nuance to this culture than history has allowed because we've needed a boogeyman, we've needed a bad guy, we've needed a other so that our story or like the Western story, the Roman story, the whatever, the European story could be told more cohesively. I think your takeaway illustrates that point so well here in Ancillary Justice, that in order for the Radch story to be told by Anander and for people like Captain Vel to buy into that story, there has to be an other, there has to be a boogeyman, there has to be people that are not us so that we can define who we are.
History is told by the victors after all, and victors need an enemy to have defeated. And that enemy had better be pretty vicious, like bad, strong, and terrible.
Right, they can't be us.
Loathsome.
Right.
They can't be us, certainly. Though Anander would disagree. As we've seen.
That's right. Okay, well, we have certainly been victorious over this book. We've completed it now, cover to cover. Well done, Opsa. Let's round out today's episode with some final thoughts. We've shared a lot of thoughts in this discussion, big and small, but if you had to put a bow on it and to tie things up for us here at the end, what did you think about this book? Are you satisfied with the conclusion? And if you had to rate it, what would you rate it?
Ultimately, I enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it spoke to a lot of really contemporary questions. You know, this whole concept and embodiment of AI and how that intersects with how we treat one another and these non-human forms, I think is super relevant. I mean, we've got things like Siri and Alexa and all these other kind of embodied AIs. And
well, maybe we don't put Siri in that category.
I'll tell you that. Siri is friend, not food. But I mean, you know, like parasocial relationships and this definitely. Kind of continued exploration of these questions, I thought was kind of really well spoken to. I think highly of this book, and chances are I probably will end up finishing the series.
Oh, wow.
As I have a little bit of a completionist instinct. I think I could just walk away.
Right.
Though maybe I should. I don't know. It was a good book, and maybe leaving it at this one is the wiser choice, but there are just still some parts of this universe that I want to see more of.
Definitely.
I can't say I terribly care what the outcome of the Civil War is, as I don't personally see that there's much to be redeemed of the Radch civilization either way.
Right.
And to your point earlier, maybe you gotta just start from scratch and uproot the whole thing, like ultimately.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I am curious about what the homeworld Radch is like. That Dyson sphere with their original population. I'm really curious whether they reflect at all the external population that followed after them, what they might think of Lord Radch and who or what Anander was prior to their development into this super being with 10 million clones,
Right,
whatever the case might be,
Yeah.
I am also wondering about the Presger, who never made a reappearance.
It sounds to me like the universe has perhaps gotten its claws into you a little bit.
It's gotten its claws into me, and I'm going to have to finish this one through.
Nice.
So, all in all, I think if I had to give this book a rating, this is a solid 3.5, 3.5.
Okay.
Gloved hands out of 5.
Wonderful. Interesting. A little lower than I thought you would say, given all the praise. But maybe we just have different systems of measurement.
I'm using the Imperial system. You must be using
or the gloved hand system.
Right.
I agree with everything you've said, except one thing where I differ. I am very happy with the conclusion of this book, and I honestly have no urge to keep reading the series. I'm very interested in the galaxy and the world and the universe that Ann Leckie has crafted in this story, but I'm less curious about knowing the answers to every nook and cranny.
Yeah.
Unlike you, I don't have a completionist tendency. I perhaps have an opposite tendency that I don't know if this has a name or not, but I'll only ever read the first of a series and then drop the rest. I'll only ever watch the first season of a TV show and forget about the rest. I did that to Ted Lasso.
Oh, that's devastating to hear.
Yeah, I imagine that's painful for a lot of our listeners to hear, but it is this weird tendency that I have. I tend to grow bored with one thing for too long, and I need to move on to something else. So for me, I think this is where I'll be ending my Imperial Radch journey, and I am more than happy with it. I had such a blast.
Yeah.
And it was especially fun to talk to you over these last couple episodes about the book. If I had to rate it, I'd probably give it 4 pins from a lover, but it's not that serious, but they gave you a pin still anyway, and you don't quite know what that means. Should you call them back? Not quite sure what that, but you're still wearing the pin because you don't want to disrespect the gift you've been given. Out of 5.
A totally unambiguous rating of pure adoration and love, it sounds like.
Yeah, I had a blast. I'd highly recommend this to sci-fi fans out there. I'd even go as far as to recommend this to people who don't typically read sci-fi. I think they'd enjoy it very much. Well, that's it. We're done with our journey with Ancillary Justice. Opsa, it's time for a new book. We're going to be starting a new journey on this podcast. And so dear
exciting.
Listener, as always, what you need to do is check the reading schedule linked in the show notes to make sure that you are all caught up on the reading for the next episode. Our schedule is always posted in the show notes for the whole season, so you always know which book to check out from the library and which chapters to read. So double check that, do your homework, and come prepared for our next conversation.
And know that though our episodes on Ancillary Justice might be over, the discussion will most definitely continue over in our free Discord.
Yes.
So go to patreon.com/sci-fi book club pod and sign up for free, join the discussion, and be welcomed to our nerdy little community.
That's right. And look, gloves, optional.
Pins, however, required. You
have to wear your Sci-Fi Book Club Pod pin, or you're not allowed entry. Well, friends, there is no real ending, and for that we cannot apologize. As we would say to us, podcasts require neither forgiveness nor permission. So help us take down the Radch Empire and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lord Party Podcast Network on lordparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @lord_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, citizen, don't forget your gloves at home, and glory to Amat.